You want to come to me?
I wanted to make that comment. I kind of blurted it out, but when Professor Courtney was speaking, that policy, at least in Israel, it seems to be somewhat, if that's not an understatement, related to politics. Every couple of years you could change the minister and the director general, and I don't know what, at least on the national level, and this is a small country, it's smaller than most states. So that affects everything. It affects priorities, etc. And sometimes it's very hard to plan in the long term. That's all I wanted to say. It's an added element that I think maybe is less felt in the United States.
Mark's the expert on Israel. Go ahead.
I'm no expert in Israel. I mean, I would say that I'm not so sure that, yes, at the national level our governments don't turn over as fast, but we have some states where the governments turn over pretty quickly. And I guess I'd just make a pitch for the sort of mid-level kinds of information I was talking about, and actually the strategy that Jack's describing, that the more we build a knowledge base that at least has some history around, okay, we changed governments and we tried that, and are able to say, and that really didn't move things the way people thought. I guess maybe I'm naive in this regard, but I can give examples from the states of where, in spite of changes in ideology, actually policy didn't change very much because there was a bit of a track record and people recognized that, going back and forth, that the last time we tried this idea didn't work, so let's not try it again. But it doesn't trump politics. I mean, people's values, politics is about values, among other things, and those don't go away.
Yeah, I would just simply add that oftentimes it's a question of you can't rid yourself of politics. It's a question of what's the quality of the politics, and to what extent does either party in a political dispute have anything other than their own ideology or some other set of tools in their toolkit used to blunt. And in point of fact, one of the reasons why we're having such ideological clashes in the U.S. is because we continue to press for ideological resolution absent the facts, and to a large extent, particularly in our field, it's an underinvestment in the infrastructure needed to create knowledge, not to rid the process of making decisions from politics, but to improve the quality of the politics, improve the quality of the debate, so that it isn't so shallow when everyone knows how complicated things are, and that continues to be a problem that I think we all face.
There is politics, but that doesn't determine everything by any means. There are people in the room who could give whole lectures on this, and in Israel there's the stability of the top level bureaucrats under the general director, are all our division chiefs. In some countries like the U.S., a lot of those turn over. Here they are stable. They are the long-term agents of change, and if you look in the child welfare area, you can see a continued progression on many of these changes over time from one government to the other. And here I do think that evidence plays a role. I think there's more and more. There's more and more influence of evidence in Israeli decision making, and the more you can build up that evidence base and the experience base, the more you will withstand the political wings. But there are cases, of course, where major reforms have come in, minister changed, out the window.
Our stable division chief. Yeah. Just, I would like you to comment on the following idea. There is nothing between evidence-based practice and evidence-based policy besides the fact that they are the same acronyms. Basically, there are totally two different EBP in both, but what the evidence-based practice and evidence-based policy are not in any kind of continuum. There are two different phenomena. That's my feeling. I would like your comment on that.
So you're saying that you see them as two fundamentally different things.
Yeah.
That's what he feels.
Yeah, I think I would be inclined to disagree. I think that it may appear that way because they're both relatively young in the evolutionary process. We've talked a lot over the last couple of days where if you look at a point in time and draw inferences about the nature of evidence in regards to either policy or practice, one will develop a certain impression that may change in time as the systems become more familiar with each other. I think that naturally they are integrated, that we're far away from the day where they will be closely integrated, and right now there's contention. So we in the United States with the David Olds nurse-family partnership, the Obama administration is very interested in using evidence-based programs as part of its policymaking frame of reference. There's a group that calls itself the Scientists for Evidence-Based Practice or some such thing, and they've endorsed in a very narrow concept of what constitutes evidence-based, and they're promoting this very strict definition. There are others who would prefer a more liberal definition of what constitutes evidence in relationship, because it leads to certain narrow types of investments, and then there's the issue of, well, do those programs work in all instances for all populations? The problems are bigger than the targeted populations in the original experiments. So you have problems of integrating where evidence practice into the policy-making framework. But the important thing is where is this likely to head, rather than draw a conclusion about how well they're connected today, because I think over time they will evolve where they're more closely linked.
It's a provocative statement. I would say that I agree to the extent that in both realms one should understand the question you're trying to answer and what's the best evidence one can bring to trying to answer that question. I would say that I think that the difference goes back to that first slide I showed, that around interventions at the individual level, quite often the question that gets asserted, I wouldn't even say it's a question, the assertion that gets made is that what I'm doing is better than what they're doing, or my program is better than your program. And at that level, in many cases, the best standard of evidence, whether you can do it in Israel or anywhere, is not the issue here. The best standard of evidence is, in fact, an experiment. That if you really want to answer that question, if you're going to say to me that, and you're going to assert that, and you're going to go before a legislator and say, pay for this instead of that, then I'm going to say, okay, this is what you need to do, or you need to find somebody to do it, or come up with other evidence, but don't make that assertion, because it's very hard to establish evidence. The kind of evidence you need for management, policy making, et cetera, quite often is not amenable to answering the question that way. It just isn't. You know, I mean, I actually around the child abuse reporting thing, I would just categorically say you can't assess the impact of implementing a child abuse reporting law through any experimental method. I mean, we have a discussion about that, and I mean, the people who study that stuff would not argue with me about that. People who don't study that might argue with me about that, but I think that the kind of evidence that's brought to bear is different. The politics, the issues of politics are very different. So, I mean, I think that they're different. But that essential, what's the question? What's the best evidence you can bring? I mean, I think that we should be doing that regardless, whether we're a program manager, a practitioner, a policymaker, a legislator. At that level, they're the same.
Well, this is a specific question about the child reporting laws. If you conducted a meta-analysis, different countries, there are many countries in Europe, in northern and western Europe, that do not have mandated reporting. And how well do they do with how many children they get into care, how many children they remove from. That would be an analysis that you can do. You can compare Holland and Denmark to the United States and Israel. You can run that. It's doable.
Well, you don't need to go internationally. You can do it in the United States, because the 50 states have different. They have very different reporting laws, very different underlying systems, social safety nets, what have you. And so the ability to study variation, and you bring up an important method for understanding, and that's variation, either by population or geography or administration or unit organization. What is the variation, and how do you use that to identify best practices, or identify best practices you would further test in the context of an experiment? And Mark is absolutely right. What's the question, and given the available technology, how do we get to the next best answer to that question?
And I didn't get that. It wasn't up there when the slide was up there, but the purpose of illustrating those three policy dimensions that can be varied in another way was to try to illustrate the point Fred just made, which is in terms of studying policy, we're much better off appreciating the heterogeneity we have and the diversity we have of policies and trying to learn from them that way, not through pretending you can have a policy experiment. So you're right. That would be a good way to study mandatory child abuse reporting, but you can't use an experiment to do it, I would argue. But I think we don't use the tool. Economists are developing, it's mainly policy economists that are developing these tools, and I think in human services we're behind where they are in some other areas of social welfare policy in terms of understanding variation across countries, within countries, and change is a good thing there. Change in your context for an experiment is really problematic in many cases, but change in policies over time within and between institutions is key to understanding, the kind of knowledge development that Jack was talking about. We want to appreciate that and build the knowledge infrastructure. You've actually got pretty good administrative data in this country. You're just starting to use it, but better than we do, right?
Oh, really?
In many ways. Well, you do.
That's great. Great news.
You do. You do, and to use it, to develop the capacity to use it is another thing, and you're working on that. But studying variation over time between jurisdictions, you can learn a lot.
Okay, I want to thank you all, and it was very interesting. I also want to thank all the audience, and